Good evening, everyone. I hope that everyone had a fantastic weekend and that you had a great first day back, a great first Monday. If you're on a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday schedule, I hope you had a great day. And thank you so much for spending your Monday evening with us. I truly am so excited. I feel like I was just being wild in the backstage with Gwendolyn because I can't stop talking about how much I love tonight's book. And it was like, it just hit me at the perfect time. So we are going to be talking about Reluctant Immortals tonight by Gwendolyn Kiste. If you didn't know already, we have copies at the store, but not only do we have copies, we have signed book plates. It would also help if I said what our store was, wouldn't it? Thank goodness I have this sign. We are the novel neighbor. If you are not in St. Louis and you want a copy of Reluctant Immortals with a signed book plate, we can get that to you because we are happy to ship it to you. So I'll put a link in the chat where you can go online and order that. And if you are in St. Louis, don't worry, we stocked up on the book, so you can stop in tomorrow and grab it if it strikes you as your perfect fall read and you haven't already gotten it yet. Like I said, I am so excited to talk about this book. Y'all, I'm so into vampires. We get a lot of that and we get some great it's just going to be a good time this evening. So before I introduce Gwendolyn, I do also want to say we'll do a Q&A at the end. But also feel free to throw questions into the chat at any point in time. If you're like, Skis, you missed an opportunity to ask a follow-up question. Why did you not ask that? Throw it in the chat. I'll be watching it and we'll make sure that it gets answered because we don't want anyone to have any not unknown questions. Anyways, okay. Wow. It's a real Monday, y'all. I'm feeling it. But I'm so excited to introduce our author. Gwendolyn Kiste is the Bram Stoker Award-winning author of The Rust Maidens and Her Smile Will Untether the Universe, Pretty Marys All in a Row, The Invention of Ghosts, Bone Set in Feathers, and Reluctant Immortals. Originally from Ohio, she now resides on an abandoned horse farm outside of Pittsburgh with her husband, 2 cats, and apparently not nearly enough ghosts. What a fantastic bio. I'm so excited. Gwendolyn, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, I'm glad we haven't scared you away with how much I'm just like gushing about this book with you, but I really can't stop because it just was like such a good time. I had so much fun reading it. It was like the perfect time for me. There's so much in it for everybody. So thank you for bringing this book to life. If people are just like hearing me gush about it and they're like, great, let's talk about what the book is. Why don't you do your like elevator pitch / like summary of the book? Because I know that you could do it better justice than I ever could.
All right. So Reluctant Immortals is the story of 2 forgotten Gothic heroines from Gothic literature, Lucy Westnera from Dracula and Bertha Mason from Jane Eyre. And they are the reluctant immortals of the title, living in 1967 California when Edward Rochester and Dracula make a very sudden return to their lives.
Yes. See, that's why I'm gushing, everybody. That's like all you need to know. You need to know like nothing else. You just go into this and you just want to read it. One of the questions I've been so excited to ask you is just like, how did this come about? I mean, you are a horror author. Like I read in your bio, you have created so many amazing stories. So it's not like altogether surprising when you look at kind of your whole list of what you have written that this story came about. But like, did you always know that you were going to write this, or this idea come out of like nowhere? What is the story behind it?
So I wrote a short story called The 8 People Who Murdered Me, excerpt from Lucy Westnera's diary. And it was, it was about a 3,500 word short story from Lucy's perspective retelling Dracula. And on the day it came out, I remember being like, oh, I was so excited that it was coming out into the world. But then I was like, I really want to hang out with Lucy more. I feel like she has more to say. And so I started thinking like, okay, like maybe expand it into a novel. But then I knew I had already just written this short story and I didn't want it to just be, a longer version of that. I wanted to do something really different. And I thought, how about, the whole thing for me with Lucy was that she didn't get to have her perspective out there enough. And so, I thought, well, who else had the same thing happen? And Bertha from Jane Eyre immediately came to mind. I'm like, well, they'd have a lot to talk about. Like, I want to see them hanging out together. And that was really like the start of Reluctant Immortals, because it was like, I really want to see what these 2 characters would do together.
Yeah. Which was so fun to think about. I had so much fun, like going throughout the story of like, because we meet them and they're together, but then you know that there's a lot that has to happen and a lot that unfolds. And it was so fun to see them react to each other and react to their environments, the things that they have bonded over together, the way that they have cared for each other. And I just loved how much they like each other, which is not surprising. But like, was that always really important for you that like they were always going to be in this story, like supporting each other and kind of like filling this role almost like, I would say kind of like a sisterly role in many ways. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I very much saw their bond as being kind of this unlikely sisterly bond that, you know, they would never have seen coming, either one of them, and yet both of them had so many things that they had, you know, similarities. You know, they were both socialites even before the start of Dracula and Jane Eyre. They both had, you know, these roles of being, you know, involved in society, and then these horrible things happen to them. So I felt like they would have a lot to bond over to begin with. And then, yeah, I didn't want it to be like a Mean Girls thing. That was something I wanted to very much stay away from. No offense to Mean Girls or anything, but like, you know, I really wanted to see, you know, them as being friends and not have the source of the tension be between them, but between, you know, them in the world, so that their bond I wanted to be very strong throughout and have it be sort of a centerpiece of the story in terms of, you know, how they're together and how they do support each other.
Yeah, and it comes through so well. You're just like rooting for them the whole time. I feel like in some ways I was like, this is almost like Thelma and Louise vibes. We're like, I'm not sure that we're making it out of this. Like, we'll see what happens. And we'll keep this whole conversation spoiler free. I forgot to say at the top, like, don't worry, everybody. We'll make sure that we don't do spoilers, but we do. It's obvious that they're going to be on a wild ride together. And so it was like, just, yeah, watching them have so much fun, even though I was reading them or listening to them have fun. Was there a different experience? So Dracula is kind of not hard, I feel like, to see the villain side to that story. Like, they've already villainized vampires pretty heavily. But depending on your reading of Jane Eyre, Rochester is not always the villain. The first question, oh my gosh, sorry, I don't know why someone's calling me. The first question is, like, in Jane Eyre world, is this always been your take on Jane Eyre? Or like, how did we get to Rochester being a villain like Dracula?
You know, I actually still say to this day, I sort of have two readings of Jane Eyre. The kind of reading of Jane Eyre that I grew up with, that I thought was very romantic, and I loved it a lot, even though I always felt terrible for Bertha. But, you know, I loved the romantic.
Feels good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I always loved the romantic elements of it. And, you know, because I love Gothic literature. I have ever since I was a kid. And I saw the film version, the Orson Welles, Joan Fontaine film version of Jane Eyre before I ever read it. But, you know, I always thought, you know, there's the one side of me that always thought it was very romantic. But then, you know, as I got older, there was the other side of me, the other kind of perspective that was like, he's not the nicest to Jane. He's definitely not the nicest to Bertha. Like, you know, he's not even nice to Blanche Ingram or Adele. Like, you know, there's a lot of people he's not the nicest to. And so, like, kind of teasing that out and wanting to explore that aspect of it, you know, that aspect of his character, and be like, okay, like, if he is a villain, like, what kind of villain do I see him as? And this was very much the you know, what was conjured in my mind.
I love that. I think it's important for people to know that, like, even though Rochester is like, I feel like sometimes people are very passionate about how their reading of Jane Eyre is. And, oh man, I'm sorry.
Oh,
that sucks. I believe our pizza order came. I'm gonna be honest. I think they're excited about it. For Jane Eyre, I feel like there are kind of, sometimes there's those who like read both sides, and sometimes all of us have passionate feelings of like, Rochester is always evil, or Rochester is like the love of all of our lives. If you're watching, feel free to say what your stance on Jane Eyre is. But so it was so fun to just read, like, as somebody who loves Jane Eyre, to just read what you did with it, because you've also created, and again, we won't say what, but it's like, you created this really fun backstory that is not necessarily in the original text. In the way that like some of the Dracula I mean, and like not everything is in an original text. I shouldn't make it sound that way, but like you had to get creative with Rochester and his backstory. Was that like fun, or did you feel any like pressure from like taking this like piece of Gothic literature that we all love and creating that backstory?
I wanted to do it justice, and I wanted to really take elements from the original. There are almost supernatural elements in Jane Eyre. Like he can, at the one point, he does sort of speak to Jane from afar, or at least she thinks he does. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But I wanted to kind of tease out those parts because those always fascinated me, growing up reading this or watching the film versions, is like how it's almost a supernatural novel, but never quite crosses that line. And I love that. And so I was like, okay, let's just have it cross that line. Let's just have it be supernatural. And yeah, I mean, I knew that some people were not going to necessarily be happy with my version of Rochester. But like, the thing I will say is that, like, honestly, like, it's only one of my interpretations. It's certainly not this idea of like, oh, well, if you like Rochester, then like, I don't feel that way at all. Like, I think why these texts stand up so well for so long, for literally centuries now, is because you can look at them from a lot of different angles. And so to me, it's just like, this is just one take. Like, this is just one, like, okay, let's go in this direction and kind of see, where it ends up, and let's just have fun with it on this angle. But yes, there are definitely people who are like, I love how you say that Rochester's the love of their life. Like I have this like great bag that's like a Jane Eyre bag, and it's like got him like on like the moors or whatever. Look, I even say all Byronic on the moors, and it's like I love it. It's great. I take the bag around. It makes me happy. I'm like, there's Mr. Rochester. Like, it's cool.
I am such like, and again, to be clear, yeah, I'm only laughing because it's like, I feel like I see all of it. And I'm just like, sometimes even reading it, you're like, wow, Rochester, so swoony. And oh my goodness. Yeah, I don't want to spoil everything for everybody, but it was really fun to see how you worked some of these non-supernatural elements into a story. That was a real highlight. I believe that I like texted my friend. I was like, I just cackled, or like I gasped out loud, or just different ways in which it was brought up. I love that so much. Something else that we can talk about is that it is also not set in either time period that those books are set in. We find ourselves in 1967. Yep. What went into your thought process around like choosing that time? Because in that sense, like so many elements come up too of like a historical fiction almost of what was going on at that time. So yeah, how did you choose that?
So, I mean, I've always loved the 1960s. I've always been fascinated by them. I've been researching them ever since I was like very young. I was always like, this is such an interesting time period for American history. And when I, decided to put Bertha and Lucy together, it was like, well, what era would I want them in? Immediately, like 1967 came up in my mind. Immediately California, because I thought it was such a time of social change. It was a time when a lot of women were really starting to kind of re-examine their roles in society. And that's really what a lot of the story is both Lucy and Bertha, she goes by the name B in Reluctant Immortals. Lucy and B really are like, hey, I want my narrative back. I want my own story back. And I felt like that was very reflected in what was going on, nationally in America, and certainly in California during the Summer of Love. And I also just like the symbolism of it, that these are kind of often considered love stories or have like romantic era, and, and then to set it in the Summer of Love and kind of deconstruct that just seemed really appealing to me as a storyteller.
Yes, it's such a multi-layered book in that sense too, like you said, because I feel like there's also some metaphors going on, there's a lot of metaphors going on for other things too, so that makes complete sense. And also one of the things that you bring into the fact that it's 1967 is not only is it the Summer of Love and like women are figuring out their role, we also meet a character, we don't have to say his relationship to the story, but who is newly back from the Vietnam War. And there's kind of a discussion around, like, we have definitely discussions around B and Lucy's trauma that is brought to them from their relationships. And at some point, like, Lucy acknowledges like his trauma that he's bringing back from the war and the way that he is pulled into this story.
Yeah.
Why was that important to you to include as well?
Yeah. You know, the 1960s, the late 1960s in particular, you know, a lot of people do think hippies, they think Woodstock, they, you know, might think San Francisco, but, you know, there was a lot of social change, like I said. And then, you know, the Vietnam War was very much there through, you know, from the mid 60s up to the early 70s. And I felt like not including it at all would be really omitting a huge, huge part of what the 60s is about. And I really wanted to have a character that was going to be able to reflect that. And yeah, and it just felt like for his character to kind of come back and bring a very different kind of trauma. Plus, I will say, like, Dracula and Rochester are the villains, and I didn't want all the guys to be bad. Like, it was like easy to like almost be like, the guys are bad, but they're not. There's like a number of male characters that are not. Like, Renfield comes into this, and he's pretty complicated as to his relationship with everyone. So, you know, so I really wanted to have like different types of, you know, characters throughout, and for the character, you know, of Michael, to have him really be there as a Vietnam War veteran, having been drafted and having to deal with that, and, you know, bringing that kind of emotional fallout to it, I thought was just going to be really important to telling that story of the 60s. And then also, you know, his relationship with Lucy and how their trauma mirrors each other and yet is very different at the same time.
I'm just thinking about how that it was such a like wonderful layer. I'm thinking about Renfield, and yeah, like not all of the men are terrible. There's a full spectrum. There's a lot of nuance and lots of relationships that represent different things, specifically around Dracula and Rochester. Rochester also gave me like Gatsby-esque vibes sometimes too.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah.
I was like just picturing that a little bit, the parties.
I like that.
I'm wondering if the characters, you always knew like this, like from the get-go when you were thinking about it, like Lucy and Bea and Dracula and Rochester and our other cast of characters, like, did you kind of like map them out and knew how they would play out with each other and like how the story would play out? Or did they kind of like surprise you and switch it up on you along the way and like tell you what the story was going to be?
You know, most of them, it was pretty well mapped out. There is a character from Dracula that I haven't mentioned that shows up, and that character, when that character shows up, was not necessarily expected and just showed up like on the page. And I was like, wow, of course this character would show up. Of course this character is going to be in it. But I wasn't expecting it until literally like I got to this scene. And I'd rewritten a few things from the outline, and I was like, okay, what's going to happen here? And then this character was just like, I'm like, of course, that's who would be here. So a lot of it was mapped out. I definitely knew, you know, where Lucy and Bea and some of the other characters were going to end up and what was going to happen. But there were definitely some beats throughout the story that like kind of happened in those early drafts, which is always exciting when like something you don't expect to happen and then you're like, oh, this works perfectly, and I can't imagine it any other way now. So
that is so fun, because obviously if you read it, we know exactly, if we've already read it, we know who you're talking about. If not, you have something fun to look forward to. And it was like just this delightful surprise to see that character. And now it's even more fun to think about knowing that you didn't know they were coming.
Yeah, I know, right?
Are you traditionally, like you mentioned, an outline? So is that like your traditional process, is you do kind of outline and then fill in? Is like, what is your writing process?
For novels, yes, I do outline. For my short fiction, I almost never outline. I just kind of let it form as it goes along because they're shorter, and I feel like I'm not going to get as lost in it. But with my novels, absolutely, it's pretty well mapped out, and I write each chapter in order. So I may not write like chapter 1 completely in order for chapter 1, but I won't write chapter 2 till chapter 1's done. That way, I'm kind of like mapping it out as it goes along, and I'm not getting as lost, hopefully, is the idea. I do have some things for later that'll be like the chapter might be slightly started with just a few lines or things here and there, anything that I might want. But like in terms of finishing a chapter, then I'll go on to the next one. So definitely in order as much as I can, because it's like otherwise I feel like I get lost very easily.
I don't even know how authors do it and keep everybody straight. So that makes complete sense that you would want a roadmap. I was asked this great question, and you've said it a couple times, so I think now is the time to ask it. Of like, I feel that we're seeing a lot of people come to horror as new horror readers, and so they're learning about the genre. And a couple people have told me like that they've noticed that a lot of it feels to them like horror in particular, even though this happens in other genres, can often start as a short story that then is made into a longer piece or built upon in some way. And they were like, why does that feel that happens more in horror, or we hear about it more? Do you have any insight or like comment on that, especially since this started kind of as a short story?
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I think horror can lend itself to, and like you said, any genre you can say this about, but horror can lend itself to a short story. So something that's just like, I think of horror a lot like ghost stories or scary stories around a campfire or a fireplace. I think of it as having this kind of very traditional roots in oral tradition. And so I think, horror short stories are something that are such a tradition, in just culture. And so, and then the thought of like, okay, so we have a short story, like being able to flesh that out. I think horror can work so well either as something that's very short and scary, or something that you kind of do more of a slow burn. So if you have an idea that you develop something short, and then you're like, I actually think I can make this longer and make it kind of a slow burn instead of just being this kind of intense piece. I think that can work. I think it can work very well. And I've known, like you said, I've known of other people who have a short story that they then expand into a horror novel. So I just think that I think it can work so well at either length. And so maybe that's why. But again, fantasy does and science fiction can. So it's certainly not just horror, but I do think that there is something about horror short stories and then being able to kind of take that idea and make it bigger.
Yeah, that's a really wonderful answer. And I was really curious to see what you would say, because that was my understanding. But I was like, you know what? I don't actually know that I've asked a horror author this. And I think it's really cool what's happening in the genre right now, where people are discovering how fun it is and are discovering that there are many subgenres to horror. And discovering that there might be some things that are not for them, but that there are a lot of things that might be for them. Did you always know that you were going to, I guess this is a two-part question. Did you always know that you wanted to write? But B, did you always know that you wanted to write in this genre, or was that a surprise at all?
I've been writing since I was very young, like 5-6 years old. So, that's definitely, I grew up with, my parents loved reading and read to me a lot. So that was definitely something that was always there. And we always loved horror. So it was kind of like, I always kind of wrote like little creepy stories and stuff, even when I was little. So it's like, yeah, honestly, when I first started like really working to get professionally published, like 10 years ago, there wasn't really a horror section in a lot of bookstores, and people were not considering that horror was viable. And so for a while, it was just like I was writing horror, but sometimes it'd be like called dark fantasy or something like that. And it was a lot harder to find markets for it. And then just literally in the last few years, the entire dynamics of publishing have shifted, and it's like horror is really seen as being very viable. So I'm so happy. Like I was so sad like 10 years ago or 8 years ago when it was like people wouldn't talk about it that much, or they'd call it thriller, or they'd call it dark fantasy. And it was like, it was very hard to find homes for it. And now there's a lot more places like, no, we're publishing horror. You can say horror now. So that's really good. That makes me really happy.
Yeah, I feel like it just continues to grow. Like our shelves are growing with it, and people are so intrigued by it and just looking for different voices in the genre. And I actually picked up, so to follow up your book, I was like, more vampires. And so a book that's been on my TBR for a while is that I feel like everyone knows Silvia Moreno Garcia for Mexican Gothic, but she has written, she has like a significant backlist, including a vampire book called Certain Dark Things. And it was really interesting at the front of her book, at the front of that book, she was discussing how hard it was to get it published, and there was not like a home for it. And then she was published with tour at Macmillan. And like how when imprint started to really pick up that they, you know, Tor is obviously dedicated a little bit in that area. And then as other major publishers like Simon started to also pick it up, like it's really become a place for authors to land, which was, yeah, I feel like people don't know how hard it was for you all to get published because everyone just sees it like going so great now.
It definitely was a different dynamic like 8 to 10 years ago. And really in the last 5 years or so, it's very, very much shifted for the better for horror. So that's been really exciting to get to actually be kind of boots on the ground there as it's been happening. It was interesting because it sort of happened and then you're kind of like, oh, this seems to be going well. But then you kind of are in the mindset of like, it could go away at any second. And I don't want to sound like, you know, negative, but I'm still worried that will happen. But it's going strong right now, so that's like a really nice time to be a horror writer. It's a good time to be a horror writer right now.
Yeah, I love that for you. And something else that I've seen that I would also love for you to speak to as well is that like then of course like many things, sometimes a genre or something has tended to be more focused on male authors or that or white authors. And so like there has been a call for more like diversity within the genre. And like I guess speaking as a woman writing in that area, like what are your thoughts on that / like your hopes for the future of the genre?
Yeah, I mean, it again, I would say it's better than it was, you know, a few years ago. And there is more of a focus on trying to have more, you know, marginalized voices really out there. And so obviously my hope for the future is that that continues on and that that's a commitment that like everybody keeps making and that readers keep reading, female authors, LGBTQ authors, authors of color, you know, every kind of diversity we can think of really making sure that people are heard and their work's getting out there. So just hopefully more of that, more room for everybody. Like you said, the shelves are getting bigger. There's room for everyone. So let's make room for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I also think it's really fun to see all of these like subgenres of like, this is absolutely a horror book based off of like the tropes and like content, but I think a lot of people would be surprised if like there's not a ton of gore, like there is not I'm trying to think of like what else, like that there's kind of like, especially with the characters that are involved, there's like kind of a lit fic feel or like literary feel to it. Not that wouldn't be across every book, but like just that you have like your Jane Eyre coming through. And like we're also seeing a lot of other fun things like cozy horror, which people are like, I didn't even know that was like a thing. And yeah, so I also am like really excited to see those elements like show off how like a horror trope belongs in a lot of different things. It is not just like your final girls like horror movie, I guess. So that's really fun. Anything else to say on that before I move on? I'm trying to think if
I agree. I think there's so many different, you know, flavors of horror, so to speak. There's so many different, you know, types of horror out there. Some people are like, oh, I don't like horror. I always like, I never want to argue with somebody because if somebody says they don't like something, I don't want to be like, you're wrong. But part of me always wants to be like, you may not have found the right horror yet. There is a chance that like you're thinking, oh, it's always got to be blood and guts, or it's always got to be, you know, there is some horror out there that's not good to women. I'm not going to pretend that there isn't. And some people, that's what they're reacting to. Like, I don't want to see something that's awful to women or, you know, awful to LGBTQ characters or awful to the characters of color. But there's, you know, so many different types of horror now that are really trying to address a lot of those things that I think some people haven't liked about horror historically. So I always want to be like, you might like horror more than you think. But I normally don't argue with people because I just am like, I don't want to be argued about if I say I don't like something, but I'm like, you know, keep an open mind. It may not be what you think.
Ask the bookseller. They'll know about it. They can help you find the right one.
Right.
Wow. I want to return to the characters of Reluctant Immortals for a second too. And because you have such a fun backlist. Yeah. Of just like, so obviously we get B / like Princey Bertha and Lucy. And like an important part to you is like to look at these stories in a different way and for women to find their voices when we feel like they have been mistreated in those stories or potentially. So are there other like women in that you like have tossing around your mind that you're like, I would love to redo their stories at all? Or like, who else do you think from the genres we need to think about differently.
Yeah, one of the things that I've said a few times is Dorian Gray and his first girlfriend, Sybil Vane, who is not treated well in the picture of Dorian Gray. I always want to say the portrait, but it's picture. I don't know, when I was a kid, I always thought it was portrait, but it's picture of Dorian Gray. And yeah, like I always felt bad. Like, again, I came to that first from the movie. I'm terrible. I came to so many things as like a really little kid on like Saturday afternoon. And so like Angela Lansbury, I believe, plays the character in the original.
So right.
Yeah, the really old, like 1940s. Like, good for Angela Lansbury. She's still around. Like, I'm like, wow, what a life. But like, she's so great as Sybil Vane in the original Dorian Gray, or at least the first one I saw. And because everything seemed to have like a silent film version, so there may be a silent film version of Dorian Gray that I haven't seen, but the first one that I know of is she's Sybil in it, and I just always wanted to see more for her character. So I originally thought about including them in Reluctant Immortals, and it would have been Dorian Gray too, but my editor's like, if you want to do that, it's going to need to be a much bigger story, and I'm like, no, I like the length that it is, so it's like that's how we went there. But someday I want to do Sybil and Dorian's story. I have some ideas, so we'll see.
Oh, I'm really gonna think about that and hope that comes to fruition, because that would be, I feel like that is something that I have not seen. I've seen a couple. I'm trying to think of what it was. I think it was just called Gray. There's like this really interesting graphic novel, adult graphic novel that is kind of like yeah, I guess it would be fair to say kind of Me Too, but a lot of other things, but encompassing a lot of things that is like based on the backdrop of like some Dorian Gray elements, more like dystopian vibes, I think is what if I'm remembering it correctly. I read it like a year ago, and I'm like, that would be really interesting to see like your take on that. I do want to take a moment too, while we're talking about this, to talk about your backlist. I read them when we were talking about your bio, but I think that people should know like what these other books are about, because it really set me down a path too. And I was like, okay, what have we not read of your stuff, and what does it need to be read? So do you just want to give everybody like a quick rundown of some of them, or some of your favorites that you liked writing?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first novel was called The Rust Maidens, and that one is about 5 girls in 1980 Cleveland who began to transform into the rust and rot of the Rust Belt. And so it's like body horror, and it's coming of age, and yeah, like that was, like I said, that was my first novel. So that one was very exciting to write, because it's always exciting to write your first novel. And so, yeah, like it won the Bram Stoker Award for superior achievement in a first novel. So yeah, I feel like that's the thing I always say about it. I'm like, yay, I won a Stoker. Yay. I always make the joke that'll be on my tombstone someday. Won a Bram Stoker Award. Everybody's probably tired of hearing me talk about it, but yeah, so that one was really, it's a darker one. I would say it's darker than Reluctant Immortals. Reluctant Immortals has a lot more humor in it. But yeah, so that was my first novel. My first collection, actually my only collection as of right now, is called Enter Smile, Untether the Universe. I love short fiction. So that's like got a lot of like, it's got body horror, kind of fairy tales, and different kinds of horror. Again, like we were saying, it's got a lot of different sort of subgenres of horror. And then my second novel was called Bones, Scent, and Feathers, and that was about witches, and like that was like a fairy tale, kind of like witches and witch finders, and witches trying to escape men who were trying to burn them. So that one's also very dark. So Reluctant Immortals is definitely the lightest of my novels so far. So it's more of like a, yeah, like almost like a buddy romp. I've heard people say this, like almost like, Bea and Lucy are like hanging out in California. So
it does feel that way. So yeah. So great. Oh yeah, and you want to talk about Pretty Mary's All in a Row?
I do. That one also is fairly light. I would say if you like kind of lighter horror that's not quite as dour or as sad, like I would say Reluctant Immortals and Pretty Mary's All in a Row. So Pretty Marys is about 5 Marys from folklore. And so it's like Resurrection Mary, Bloody Mary and Amir, Mary Lloyd, Mistress Mary Quite Contrary, and Mary Mac. So it's like different like folklore and nursery rhymes, and they're all like living in this house together as ghosts, and they don't know how they got there, and they're trying to figure out like who they are and how they can kind of escape this fate that they have. So yeah, that one I actually feel like tonally is the most similar to Reluctant Immortals. Okay. I feel like those two, like there's no connection between them by any stretch, but you know, they're kind of retellings, and then they've got a lot of humor in them. So yeah.
Wow. I know. I like Sullivan. I was like, people have to know about all of your books, but that one seemed to be the most tonally like this one, like Reluctant Immortals, which, I also want to keep telling everybody because it keeps coming up in my light. Like mine is the Arc, so it is shiny. But yes. Reluctant Immortals has a like more matte finish, and both beautiful, but wow, the matte just has good. We talk all the time of like good hand feel too, where you're just like, that just feels perfect.
Yeah. Like, let me see if I have it here. I think I have it here somewhere so you can see the difference. Yeah. So it's like, it actually like, you can't quite tell, but it also is like embossed, which I didn't know it was until it came in the mail like a week and a half ago. And I was like, oh my gosh, like it's like you said, like I'm like, oh, but yeah, so it is like more matte than the shiny Arc version. So like,
yes. So just so everyone knows, because sometimes that matters to people. Which I think is also the perfect time to talk about the cover of this book, because it was like one of those where like people looked at it when it came into the store, and all of the booksellers were like, hello. And I was like, oh yeah, have you not seen her cover yet? So I know sometimes authors have say in the cover, and sometimes they like know nothing about the cover. So what did you know about the cover, other than we know you did not know it was embossed?
Yeah, and that was the final version. Yes, I did. That was a nice surprise. But yeah, like they sent me a few different versions of a cover, and this was like the one that it was like right away. I'm like, that's the one. And yeah, it's just, I didn't have much to do with it except saying, yay, I love it. Like, and that's good by me. Like, I'm good with that. Like, it's definitely it's just a very fun process seeing it because it is so bright. And like, I love bright things anyways. Like, I'm a very bright person. Like, you can't quite see, but like even my dress.
Oh, she's talking about the cover.
Yeah, I know, it's true. And I love colors like this. And like, I imagine the book very much like Technicolor, like from the 60s and everything. So when I saw this cover, I'm like, this is so perfect. This is exactly like how I would imagine it. So yeah, it's a very bright, happy cover. So I like that.
They did do such a good job of just like, you know, you don't necessarily know that it's set in 1967 unless you like read the back of it or were familiar with that before seeing it. And so I feel like it does such a good job of like giving you that vibe going into it, but like also the psychedelic-esque nature of the colors / like the title really tells you like you're going for something that's a little bit like different, like not a music themed thing from 1967. Yeah. Maybe what I'm trying to say. So I really thought the cover was brilliant. Now I'm just looking at her. I think one of the other things that we need to make sure. Oh, I did see somebody put this in the chat, and actually, this is maybe I have two questions that are based around this. But Chris Grabenstein wants to know what your favorite book is.
Oh. Wow, that's always hard. But if I had to pick one, probably We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. I love that book. It's almost cozy horror in a way. Like you were talking about cozy horror. It's almost a little bit like I would call it cozy horror. I always kind of think of it as like whimsical horror because Mary Cat's kind of whimsical, even though there's like, you know, death and everything going on and fire and horrible things. But there's almost a whimsy to it. And I just love that. I love that juxtaposition between like horror and something kind of fun and lighthearted. So yeah, if I had to choose, We Have Always Lived in the Castle.
Yeah, you can. Do you need to tell us about more than one? Like, did we?
No, that'll be okay. That'll be okay. Because otherwise, I'm just going to say Dracula and Jane Eyre, anyways. Because and obviously, I've spent a lot of time with them recently.
I was proud of you for not answering both of them.
I know, right?
Something I didn't ask when we were kind of talking about this, though, of like, did you have to reread them a bunch when you were creating these characters? Or did you like already know those books backwards and forwards that like you didn't really need to?
You know, I knew them fairly well, but I did go back to specifically the sections about Bertha and Lucy. I really did focus mostly on those and thought, you know, if I'm going to go back to the original stories, let's really look at those sections because, you know, that's going to be the things that are going to affect them the most. So I remember, like, what's so great is because they're both in public domain, obviously, like, you know, they're available like online. So it's like you can do like a search and find for like Bertha's name or Lucy's name. And I can make sure like I'm getting, like, I wanted to make sure that anything, especially with Bertha, because she doesn't have a lot in the original book. Like Lucy, you get a lot more of a feel for what she's like in Dracula, but Bertha, you really don't. And I wanted to be able to take as many just little details here and there as I possibly could to try to connect her to that version as much as I could. So it's like I would look and like really scour it and like the text and be like anything that's even suggested, like trying to just pull out those little bits and pieces to kind of, you know, have that as that kind of like backbone of her character, even though obviously, you know, there's a lot more to her in Reluctant Immortals, but definitely have her be there to at least some extent from the original.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I am glad that you got to be like, Control F, where's all of Lucy's stuff?
Right. I'm like, I haven't thought that. I'm like, man, like sometimes I think about how lucky we are to live in an era where so many things are so readily available and it's so easy to find things that it's like I can make sure that I don't, you know, miss anything. And it's like so much easier than being like, I've got to leaf through this all over again. It's like, yeah, Control F with a friend.
I also, you mentioned watching horror movies. We've talked about that like a little bit. And so I do think you also deserve a chance to say like a couple movies that you feel were like pivotal to your life or to making you a horror connoisseur.
Ooh, I like that. So obviously we'll say other than Dracula and Jane Eyre, since I've already talked a lot about those. Let's see. Which ones did I really love growing up? Definitely Hammer movies in general, though that's kind of like Dracula movies too. So that's still kind of cheating and still saying Dracula. You know what that immediately comes to mind, and I saw it really young because both my parents loved it and it seemed to always be on TV, was John Carpenter's The Thing. I feel like I saw that at probably 5, 6, 7 years old. I was little. I know by the time I was 7 or 8, I'd seen that movie several times, and it's so creepy, but I loved it. I always felt bad for the dogs. And isn't that funny? Like, not all the people, right? Like, I'm like, I was so sad about the dogs. I'm like, poor dogs. Like, that's my first thought even now, because as a kid, like, you're always like worried about the animals. Like,
yeah.
I am, right? But it's like, yeah, like I feel like that one was a big one when I was young. I saw Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween, when I was fairly young too. But The Thing really sticks out in my head because it seemed like it was always cold in Ohio when I was growing up. So it always seemed like it was that time of year to watch The Thing. And it was always like, yep, we're going to make hot cocoa and watch The Thing. It's on TV again. And so, yeah, that was the best.
I was wondering if you were to shout out any John Carpenter of just that, like, that was Halloween. I know I had to have seen before I was like 6.
I love it.
And my friends are like, huh? And I'm just like, listen, I don't know. We were very into Halloween at my household. Like in general, but also the movie, like, very into scary things.
Yeah.
And yeah, which is almost kind of fun. I love that because I don't know if you experience this at all when you like tell people about The Thing, of just that, like, I feel like the slight sense of fear that you felt when you like watched it as a kid, like always stays with you. So like that Halloween theme song, that I can never do it justice, but like, if you know, you know, of like, that will always get me. Like, that will always get my heart racing. I'm always freaked out. And even when I showed it to my husband, he was like, I mean, if you clock it, it's like 45 minutes before like the first death. Which points to like how cool it was and like what John Carpenter was doing at the time. But I was like, oh yeah, I think I'm probably just remembering the fear that I have.
It's totally true. Like that, like fear and exhilaration and like all those emotions mixed together, especially as a kid. If you're into horror as a kid, I think you're so right. It stays with you.
Yeah. Oh, this is a great question that I think came up from like talking a little bit about going back through Dracula and Jane Eyre. Did you do so? Bee's thing that makes her immortal, I don't feel like we can really talk about because we don't want to spoil like a backstory or how you like developed it, because that's like kind of the fun thing that you discover. I feel like we can talk about for Lucy that it's vampire, and like we know that. So did you have to do like any research outside of Dracula on vampires, or like what path did you go down there, or was it kind of just what you knew from Dracula?
I feel like I've spent so much time studying vampires, like, which is such a strange thing now that I'm saying it aloud. But like, I've watched a lot of documentaries, I've read a lot of books, I've gone to like brown bag luncheons where people actually talk about vampire history and things like that. So I felt like I had a lot of knowledge just already about different types of vampires. And it was just like, I hadn't written something that was very long. Like I'd written some short stories with vampires, but nothing this long with vampires. So it was just really exciting to be able to, and to be able to explore it. Like I knew I wanted to kind of play with the mythology in some ways that I hadn't seen done before. So that was really exciting too. And just different ideas I had, like, the sunlight comes into it, because in Bram Stoker's original novel, sunlight doesn't kill vampires. It just makes them not powerful. And so I wanted to do something with that, and that I incorporated it into the book, because I wanted to kind of like say, okay, well, there's these different things that maybe people don't realize if you don't remember exactly from Dracula, because most of the versions, sunlight kills them, right? But it's like that wasn't in Bram Stoker's version. And so I was like, okay, let's play with that and see, how I can incorporate that, but also do something a little different with it. So with stuff like that, and like other thoughts, like the soil that they live in, that takes that burnt comes into it, the decay that's always around vampires. And I want to just take different things that I'd always thought about and been like, okay, let's just try to tweak it a little bit and just like take it in a slightly different direction, at least that I've seen done before.
And that comes through so well. I love knowing that, and like what your research process was, because it was fun to be reminded of like what is actually the original maybe canon, I guess we would say, and then like what have we taken, and like all fun liberties that have been taken for the most part. But yeah, like not everything has to be that sunlight kills a vampire, like that this is the only way that we understand or know vampires. And in many ways I feel like your story kind of returns to some of the original, like for me at least, I associate vampires and Dracula with being just like very scary, lots of blood sucking, like maybe more like Buffy the Vampire Slayer vibes, I guess you could say too. Versus like, I feel like you really got us back to the root of like Gothic literature. And like you said, like kind of like how decay is around them and very much part of the story, and like what does just being in their presence do versus the emphasis on like killing people or turning people into vampires, or having these like kind of vampire powers too, I guess, that we associate of like being able to run super fast if you were like a Twilight person.
Which is fine. I know a lot of people don't like Twilight. I never read the books, but like any vampires are good vampires. So
you haven't read the books? Fascinating.
No.
That's great. No, I think that's like so great. I feel it's been a long time since I've read them. So yeah. We were just talking about Twilight today. Okay, everybody, if there's any questions that you haven't gotten a chance to ask, please know that you can throw them in chat at any time. But I'm going to move to one of my favorite portions, which is our this or that portion. So it is not about Reluctant Immortals, but we did theme it to the fact of like, I know that it is August 29th, and I'm sorry to rush everybody, but this is a vampire book, and it really, like, when I read this earlier this month, I immediately was like, we're in vampire mode, everybody. We're in fall mode. We're in Halloween mode. So, and also September 1st happens this week. I hate to break the news to everybody if you did not know. So all of these are themed to kind of fall fun things. So obviously I can't, the only rule is if you don't like one of the two options that I give you, you just have to provide a third option. So not too hard and hopefully not too scary. But I think the first thing we start off with is like, so obviously we can't ask about vampires because we know what you would choose. But if you had to choose between werewolves or witches, which would you choose?
Witches, definitely witches. I love witches.
Such a fast answer.
No offense to werewolves, they're fine too, but I love witches more.
And you have written a witchy book, as we discussed. So I was wondering if they were too near and dear to your heart. Yes. Okay. But do you like werewolves, or are you like pretty out on them?
No, I like werewolves. I think about werewolves, like I like to see different things done with werewolves. So like when somebody can do something really different with werewolves, I'm like, thumbs up, thumbs up.
Yeah.
So.
I'm excited. I've been reading, I don't know if you've ever read Cackle by Rachel Harrison last year.
I
Very
haven't
much.
read it yet. Yeah, but she's got a new one, right?
Yes, very much a cozy horror if anyone hasn't read it, but she has a werewolf book coming out and I'm in the middle of reading it and it's doing some fun things. So it's been very fun to read both of your books like at similar timelines where I'm like watching some very fun things happen. Yeah. Okay, this is definitely more of a basic question, but are you a pumpkin pie or an apple pie?
Oh, wow. Okay. This is a hard one. Wow.
It could determine a lot about you too. I don't know.
This is terrible, but I'm probably an apple pie person. My husband is a pumpkin pie person, and I like pumpkin pie, but if I had to choose, I'd go with apple. I hope my husband isn't upstairs listening because it might be like, what are you doing?
If he's watching this, we're gonna see him like,
yeah, pumpkin pie for you, honey. That's what it's about. But yeah, I think apple pie.
Well, do you eat both? Like you definitely eat both, but like apple pie is just more your okay.
Yeah, I think so. I've never thought about it till just now, but like once you said it, I'm like, oh yeah, it's apple pie. It's definitely apple pie. I love
apple pie flavored other things like.
Okay, so that's a good point. Like pumpkin flavored things in general, I think I like more than maybe apple flavored things. But actual pie, boy, this is weird. Like I never thought about this, but actual pie, I think I like apple pie better.
Tonight you're gonna be laying in bed like thinking about your taste buds and be like, what happened here? Like why?
Yeah. No, it's true. Like I don't have a good answer. Yeah, this is weird because I actually like cooking with pumpkin. Like my husband and I make a lot of like, pumpkin pancakes or pumpkin, we made pumpkin grilled cheese sandwiches, which was much better than what it may sound. It was actually really delicious.
Like, was the pumpkin like a spread or?
Yeah, it was like a spread. Yeah, like it wasn't canned pumpkin. You had to actually like cook it down from like a pie pumpkin. And then like, but it was still kind of like a spread, but not as much like almost like a jelly that canned pumpkin would be. And then it's like cheese. And yeah, it was really good. It was really good. I made this in a couple of years. So now like, I need to do that. But yeah, like if I had to choose between like pumpkin donuts and apple donuts, definitely pumpkin donuts, but not like, but yeah, this is weird. Like I would not have guessed this. This is took a very strange turn for me.
Oh my gosh, incredible. Okay, maybe this is perfect for your home of residence. I'm like trying to think, maybe not. I don't know why I said that. I mean, I'm just into the fact that you live in a barn with not enough ghosts, and abandoned, which we should talk about. But are you like a fireplace in your home or a fire pit, like bonfire vibe?
Probably more of like a fire pit bonfire vibe because like I'm looking at our sad fireplace that we've actually kind of more or less covered up. Like it can be used, but it's basically covered. So it's like, but we have a fire pit. We don't use it very often. It's like a little metal fire pit. So yeah, more of a bonfire person than a fireplace person. Yeah.
I was just thinking, I associate, like I used to go to friends, like I grew up in farm country, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. Shout out. And so like bonfires are much more common. Like I was like associating like like old horse farm with like
bonfire. Yeah. No, you're completely right. And that's how I answered. So you were 100% right. Yeah.
I was like, I don't know what I'm saying. Okay. I know that I'm sitting here in, you and I are both sitting here in short sleeves, but picture it. It is a autumnal day. Leaves are falling. It is it's getting colder. We're under 70 degrees. It's great. Are you a cardigan person or a scarf person? Like which can you?
Oh, cardigan, definitely cardigan. Like the scarves, like I feel like I don't know what to do with them. I put them on. They're cute and like I like people can really make them look nice, but when I put them on, I'm like this wrapped around my throat, kind of freaking me out. Definitely cardigan. Like I've got like a lot of cardigans. Like I think I've got like a pumpkin cardigan. I've got like skulls on cardigans. So yeah, definitely cardigan.
That sounds really fun. Yeah. Yeah, I watch a lot of scarf tutorials and then never wear the scarf because I really don't think that I can be like other people.
Yeah, like I have like a whole book on how to like fold scarves in different ways. Do I ever do it? No. No, but like it looks cool. It's a neat idea, but like maybe this year I'll try more with scarves. I'll try. It'll be like my fall.
The scarf for you. Yeah. Okay, final this or that question. It all hinges on this for everybody, but Rocky Horror or Hocus Pocus?
Oh, Rocky Horror. I got to go with Rocky Horror. So that's like this is also related to my husband. Like there's a fairly well-known like Rocky Horror troupe out of Pittsburgh. They were even in the movie like Perks of Being a Wallflower. My husband was one of the founding members of that Rocky Horror troupe because he's a few years older than me. So this was back in the early 90s. And like, yes, so like Rocky Horror, like it's got like a huge like thing in like our in my household. So definitely more of that. Plus, like spoiler alert for Hocus Pocus, I don't like what happens to the cat in it. It bothered me, the ending with the cat. Like I was really traumatized as a child. So like I'm not a big fan of Hocus Pocus because it traumatized me. But Rocky Horror has a positive vibe. So that's the answer.
Wow, incredible. I've never heard anybody. I love the role that watching anything even remotely horror related as a child is in direct relation to how the animals were treated, is how you feel about it. That's
right, because I already brought up the dogs in the thing, right? Yeah. Like this is totally how I am. That's so funny. Yeah, this is
which makes me feel safe with your books, that I will never have that happen to me. Like that feels perfect. That's
yeah, I don't think so. Like, yeah, I'm thinking, have I ever just randomly killed an animal? Like maybe, but like, okay, so I had a short story that a bird died. Like actually I've had some birds die in short stories and like even one of the novels, but I think all the birds always end up coming back to life as like ghost birds. And so it's like, even though they die, they come back. They're still in the story. They're just ghosts. So like, yeah.
Literally actually my nightmare. The only movie that has ever like, I can do almost any kind of horror movie and like be mostly fine. For some reason, The Birds.
It was scary. Yeah. How old were you when you saw it?
16. So okay. It should be fine. I saw Cujo when I was like 8. So like I really don't know.
That's great. I love that. It's an unnerving movie though, because it's like it's very much like a humans against nature movie, because those birds just don't care. Like they are just unfeeling, and there's like never an explanation. There's like a lot of existential dread in the birds that people don't talk about, but there really is, because it's like, why did this happen? Nobody ever knows. And then like the ending with Tippi Hedren in the bedroom, really scary. It actually is a scary movie. I understand.
I think that the same way that you just processed weirdly that you like, not weirdly, but like that you're like, weirdly, I like apple pie, but not apple related things and pumpkin things more than, I think that you just made me realize like, yeah, that's why with those two movies, Cujo at least had like a reason.
Yes.
And it was bad, but
yeah.
Like, I have an explanation that I don't think a dog is randomly going to just turn on me. I like at any given time when I see a bird, I'm like, you could decide that you hate me and I'm done.
Well, the weird thing about birds is every once in a while they do that. Like, especially if you don't know that there's a nest nearby, they will like dive bomb you. That does happen. Like, I remember my mom got like dive bombed by these birds. Like, it was actually like the day after we watched The Birds one time, and like these birds were dive bombing her, and she's like, "What?" And it was yeah. So it's true, but you're right with Cujo. Like, isn't there even a thing in there like just get your dog's rabies shots and you can avoid it? It's actually like a PSA. It's important. Get your dog's rabies shots. It's true. But you're right, like that at least has an explanation. But the birds, like, who knows why they did what they did? Who knows? And you're right, like it could still turn on you. Like I love birds. I actually really love them a lot, but like they've got a mind of their own.
They really do. Wow, incredible. Thank you so much for helping me realize that. As a general PSA, I do want to say my parents did not mean for me to be watching Cujo when I was 8 years old. That was one of those accidents where I was like, they did not realize I'd come down the stairs and I didn't mean to be hiding behind something, but just like the visual of the small child, like just the bureau, like covered. Yeah. And no one knew that I had been watching it until I started crying. And that was a low point for everybody.
That's great.
Because I didn't know what rabies was. So I had to get an explanation and be assured that our dog wasn't going to randomly do that one day. And everyone ended up being fine. But yeah, here we are. I do want to end on discussing that your home does not have enough ghosts. Does it have any ghosts or just not enough of them?
For a while I would have said none, but then like over the last few years, we've seen what we call third cat, and it just looks like a cat that just like scurries by, and we think it's one of ours, but then we realize it's not. And then like somebody else who like lives in the area actually told us like, oh yeah, that's a thing that happens in this area. That's like a thing, like just in like our county or something. I don't know. It was so weird because like you think you're gonna tell somebody this, and they're like, oh no, like this is a thing. Other people have reported that there's like ghost animals, ghost cats in like our like rural area. So I'm like, oh, okay. Like, so yeah, so maybe a ghost cat, like we call it third cat. Although now we have like a cat that lives outside too. So I don't know if the indoor cat is now, the indoor ghost cat is maybe fourth cat now. I don't
know. Had to get renamed. Totally fine. Wow. I haven't heard anybody report a ghost animal in a while. I mean, I know that people have, but yeah. That's kind of fun. I wish you wish you had more.
It's okay. It's all right. We have the one now. Like when I wrote the bio, there was no third cat, but now there's third cat. Like, so it's probably okay. You don't want too many ghosts. Like you won't be able to,
fill the home with.
Exactly. So probably enough ghosts. Maybe I should update my bio.
No, that's. I was just like, are you like trying to have? Yeah, we have one at the store, and that seems to be plenty for us. Yeah. Ooh. Yeah.
What do you know about this ghost?
We know very little other than our understanding is that she might be on the younger side. And as long as like a play toy is left around, it seems to go better for the store. Yeah. Because things that have happened to us are like, if something hasn't been left, like just that she seemed, I don't remember if we just decided she was a girl or if I don't think we necessarily know everything. I just tend to gender lots of things that way when I talk, but like, I think maybe we did decide, but she doesn't have like a stuffed animal or something to play with. Like books will come off the shelves. Like she just seems to get like a little bored and be a little bit of a trickster. And just kind of like, yeah. And also if you're impolite to her, if you don't say goodbye to her. So that did not prevent us from doing a sleepover at the bookstore. And she was like perfectly nice and let us in her area. So, and nobody reported anything, but yeah, so we think that we have one. There was some energies there. So
I love it.
One feels like enough, though. Like your third cat feels like enough,
Third cat is enough. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I love talking about that. I honestly feel like I need to ask more authors about it because I feel like a surprising amount of people, like not just horror authors, are like, yeah, I totally have a ghost.
Yeah. There's something weird's going on.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I feel like our hour is coming to a close. I don't feel like it is. Objectively speaking, the hour has passed. So thank you everyone for watching, or if you're watching in the future, thank you for checking this out. If you have not already picked up Reluctant Immortals, you absolutely need to. I'm going to show you the cover one more time. And if you joined us a little late, know that we do have signed book plates from Gwendolyn, and we'd be happy to include those both with if you're local and want to pick it up from the bookstore, or if you would like to purchase it online. I'm going to drop you the link right here. This is our website, and you can pop on and get your order in. Just type it into the space bar. Just type in the title, and it'll pull you right to it. So you absolutely need this book. I'm telling everyone about this book this fall. Thank you so much for writing it. And thank you so much for being here. Is there anything you want to say before we sign off?
Just thank you so much for this. This was wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Everyone read this book. And we will see you all. We have some virtual events. We don't have a ton of them the rest of this month, or even honestly at the beginning of September. But virtual events are still definitely a thing that we are doing. So check out the events calendar if you want to check out what's happening later in the month. But for now, we are out for this evening. Everyone have a great rest of your Monday.